That's why we want it.
Many good aim.
I think we call it Leaves of Autumn.
That's
Yes.
We call it.
Summer leaves.
So we're welcoming our online audience, and it's a real joy to have Yvonne with us, all the way from Germany. And we'd just like to invite you to come and share a little bit of your journey and how you've come to be here, and if you'd like to come up and share with us. Thank you for being brave.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Oh, I'm
I'll
a little
sit here.
surprised to stand here. I was sitting there and looking forward to listen. I'm here to talk.
Yeah, you.
Daniel's excited.
Well, me too. Yeah, express it for me. And so, what I shall tell you. I mean, the journey started 38 years ago, but so that was the first time I was invited to hear about Jesus when I was 7 years old, or it was 37 years. And a friend of mine invited me in the school bus to join the Sabbath. No, it was not Sabbath. It was Sunday. Sunday children Sunday school. Yeah, Sunday school. And yeah, I totally fell in love with Jesus, and he was my friend and he was my hero. And when I was 8 years old, I said, I want to be baptized. So I wasn't, because my parents were not in the church, but they supported my way. They just let me go, and so I said I want to be baptized. And the pastor from the local church, he just did it. I don't know why, but I mean, I didn't have that question at that time. For me, it was just I wanted it, and it happened. So yeah, but it was yeah. Then the journey went on, and as I got older, I came in touch with the church. So the Sunday school was in our village. It was very homey, a grandma, and we were singing and just listening to stories about Jesus. It was just nice. And then I came in touch with church, and I didn't get it anymore. So, and I couldn't find my Jesus there, and I had some questions when it came to confirmation. Or is it the right word?
Yeah, confirmation. Yeah.
It's the same word. So, and I had questions and I didn't get answers. So, and I couldn't go to church. I didn't like this whole ceremony and the whole process, and I just couldn't find Jesus there. And then this grandma, she died from the Sunday school, and yeah, and somehow my belief died. So I just lost it.
How old were you then?
About 14, or 12 to 14.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where all the questions come up,
Yes.
and so I just lost it, and I didn't manage, or nobody managed to help me into from child to an adult in this process, and and then I got lost in the world. So I went into drugs and into everything, and I left home, and so my parents had a lot of struggle with my struggle, and and then I was always searching for answers and for sense of what is the sense of life? Yeah, is that right? And yeah, what is my purpose, or what am I doing here? Yeah. And there must be more. And I was always looking for, where's my home? So I always knew I don't belong to my parents, even though I love them and they love me, but I didn't belong there. And I didn't have friends where I belonged to. And I didn't have a home, even though I had a home, but not a spiritual home. And I was always looking for it. And so I was looking in the esoteric scene, an alternative scene, a community, free love, and all that things. And I always thought, yeah, there it is, and there it is. But the deeper I went into any path, the less I got. So I couldn't find anything. I thought it's shamanic, or it's yoga, or it's whatever, but I got lost at the end. Or, I mean, I didn't go to the end, so I didn't go so far, but there was always something or someone who brought me back. So, and when I look back, I thought I was always blessed. So Jesus never let go. So he always helped me out, and he always showed me where it doesn't lead anywhere. So I never found a foundation to stand on. And everybody told me you have to find a spiritual anchor. I said, yeah, I'm looking for it, but it's not there. It's just not there. And so then 3 years ago, I was living in a community, and a guy came in for a weekend seminar, and I don't know why, but he decided to make friends with me, or he invited me to help him. So he needed some, I don't know how to say it. He just asked me for help, so in different areas. And he was an Adventist, and he was giving a concert. He's a very great piano player, and he was giving a concert, and I was listening to him, and I didn't know anything about him. But then sometimes I thought, don't I know that song? Didn't I? It sounds like a song I sang in Sunday school. I said, that's a Christian song, isn't it? And I always loved these songs, and I was singing them, and yeah, whatever. And or whenever, even though I didn't believe anymore, I was always believing, or how to explain. I always wanted to live a holy life. That was my goal, but I didn't know how to come to that, because I tried so hard, and it was just not possible. Yeah, I was so unholy. The life I lived was so unholy. Was this whole free love and running around naked or whatever. I tried to be in nature and to be free, and I wanted to be free. Yeah, but I was so caught. Yeah. And but however, this guy impressed me, and so over 2 years we were in contact and developed a kind of friendship. And then after 2 years, I was in his place, and at that time I felt totally ill. I wanted to go to hospital because I was depressed, and I was crying every day, and because of 10 euros I was completely crushed, and I was in a very deep black hole. So, and then he came up with, maybe there's a battle going on inside of you, and it's the battle between Jesus and Satan, because you gave yourself to Jesus when you were 8 years old, and he doesn't let go. And at the same time, you gave yourself to Satan, even though you didn't know, because I never was wanted to be, like bad girl or something. I never wanted that, but I was. and yeah, and somehow that reached me. I knew there's something right with what he says, and then he gave me a talk from Eden to Eden, from I forgot the name of the guy. I'm sure you know
Just
him.
for applause?
No.
Spiritual health.
It's an Adventist, a Swiss man who went to America.
Back to Eden?
No.
From Eden to Eden.
That's that book, crap.
Yeah, Frazier.
Martin took it to America, remember?
Yeah, I do, but I'm trying to think of his name.
I don't remember
Say Swiss?
He's from Switzerland, yeah.
An older Adventist book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know who you.
We're familiar with the book, but we don't know the author.
Can't remember the order.
Yeah, I don't know.
Not Emilio Caneclo.
No, I think it's something.
It's a lot
Francis
earlier.
something or something.
Yeah. But however, I was listening to it and I was completely. I thought, if this is the truth, then everything makes sense. Like, you know this game Tetris?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like this. So my layers were filled up short under the ceiling, and there was one piece going into it, and like, and I said, wow, that must be the truth.
Wow.
And even though I didn't fully believe it, but I thought, okay, let's give it a chance. And I decided to believe that the Bible is the Word of God, and that there is a truth in this salvation plan. And so, and from that moment on, my depression was gone, and I didn't cry anymore. I mean, I cried at lunchtime, but that's different, you know. But this black hole, it was just gone from that moment. And so I started to study, and I found my way through YouTube, and I found everything, like you can find everything there. But I somehow had a clear guidance, so I could sort out what is right or what is not right. So, and when I started to pray, I couldn't hardly say the word, just the word Jesus. It didn't want to come out. Yeah. I couldn't speak it loud, and I couldn't pray loud. But through some processes, and then I read about to clear your house, and when you throw out the demons, or I don't know what the words, but when you throw it out and you keep the room empty, then it will come back sometimes. Yeah. And so I thought, all my thoughts, I throw them out, but I have to fill my mind, not to doubt and not to struggle around. And then I was singing the whole day. So all my children's songs I knew, and I was singing, just not to think, you know, because I couldn't think. I couldn't think something nice or something good or whatever. It was just doubting and dark, and and then I started to sort out all my things, like all my material and my computer and my handy, and so I threw everything away what was not from God, or I thought it's not. Yeah. Everything I wasn't sure that if it was from God, or how to say it, could it be that this is from God? And if the answer wasn't yes, then it was a no, and I threw it away. Even though I really loved my drums, and I was a drummer for 10 years, yeah, and I had a shamanic drum, and I was really, in the shamanic way, everything is alive, you know, this, I was really much into it, and all my feathers I had collected and everything. I really loved these things, and my pendulum and my cards and all this stuff. And I had angel cards, and I really loved them. They're beautiful. But I thought, no, God doesn't work through these things. I don't believe that. And so I threw it all away. And I sorted out at least a third of all my things. I had clothes and just everything. And my computer was almost empty. So it was almost like my brain should be empty. Yeah. And I did it. And that was so good. It was a real hard process to go through, because I was so like hooked onto that things. And the more I was hooked onto it, the more I knew it wasn't from God. Yeah. So that was a clear sign. So if you're hooked onto it, then it's not from God. So I threw it away, and that was such a release, and and all these steps, and I made, and they were really, really great. Yeah, and then after 2 or 3 months, I studied all around in the internet, and I went to a church on Sabbath. And but somehow it didn't bring me further. So I had questions, and they weren't answered. And I found the feasts, and I thought, oh, that makes sense. So not just going from one Sabbath to another, but to be together. Once, twice, 3 times a year, like a whole family. That was just my simple view of it. But I thought it makes sense. And so why is the moon and the sun there for times and seasons? And why are we're not keeping the feasts? I didn't get it. So and the answer was, it's not important anymore. It's all nailed on the cross. And I thought, but then I can throw away more than half of the Bible. That doesn't make sense. So why is it in the Bible? And so the Old Testament is such a big part of the Bible. And if I have to throw half of it away, it doesn't make sense. So there must be something in it. I didn't know what, but I thought there must be something. And I never had the question if Jesus is the Son of God. For me, it was totally clear. So I never had this question, and I never heard about the Trinity in my Sunday school. So
this is when you were in the you'd come to the Adventist church?
That was 1 year ago.
1 year ago?
1 year ago, yeah. So, and I wasn't familiar with all these beliefs, and it was very interesting for me, the whole prophecy thing, and for sure it was totally interesting. But there were some questions, and that was about the Trinity and the feasts, and about the order of male and female. I loved it when I found it in the Bible. It was even though I was in that free love thing for more than 20 years, and I really was, yes, that's it, for sure, love is there for everybody, and men and women are equal, even though I wasn't a feminist, but I am, or was, whatever, a very strong woman, and in relationships it always turned. After some time it always turned, and I became a mother, and my friends became my child or whatever, and it was always like just a mess. I never had a good relationship. So and that was, I just sensed it, that this was the answer to it. I couldn't explain it, and I can't say I have studied it through or I have experience with that, but I read it and I thought, yeah, that makes sense, and that's the answer to the mess I experienced. So, and yeah, so and then after a while, so this Trinity, I knew I wanted to be baptized again. For sure, that was clear. I had no question about that. And I thought, yeah, the Adventist movement or the Seventh-day Adventist is, I think, they're the best I ever found. So, but so there was a but. I thought, but I can't be baptized there because the 20, I think it's 28 points. I cannot sign it. I just cannot because I don't understand, and I was struggling with the Trinity, and nobody could really explain it to me. They wanted to baptize me anyway or whatever. they offered me, and I said, yeah, well, that's very nice, but I cannot sign it. So I cannot be baptized into something I don't believe in. So that doesn't make sense. But I wanted to belong to God's people, and I thought it is God's people, and so where do I belong? And how can I belong to that when I don't believe in it fully, or I'm not really connected to it? And then I didn't come further, and I thought, okay, maybe I have to let go. So I have to study something else. I don't find the answer to it. Maybe it's not that important. But if it's not important, why it is written there? So it must be important. Otherwise it wouldn't have been one of the points. Yeah. So it's just 28 points, and they must be important. So if not, then why is it there? And then I decided, okay, then I let go. But I didn't know what to study, and so I prayed, and then I went into YouTube, and then Adrian popped up. Yeah, hello. Really, I don't know what I typed in, but it just appeared.
Erotic.
And then I said, okay, then I don't let go. And yeah. And then I was so like, well, that's maybe not all. I still have questions, but that was in first case about all the answers that I had.
Wonderful.
So that was really, really great. So, and that was in January, and then I thought, oh, I think that's the one I want to be baptized from. So that's what I can sign, even though I don't have to. But
You don't have to.
yeah, I know. But I do. I mean, it's inside. I do. So, and yeah. So, and that brought me here.
So how did you get in touch with the other believers in Germany and come to be at the fence?
So on YouTube, it's I wrote an email to Jutta and asked her, so where are you? So I want to meet you. So
Yes.
so where are you as a people? Yeah. So I cannot go. I was on Hartz IV. It's a social money, or so I didn't work at that time because I was ill for a couple of years, and so I couldn't even think about coming to Australia, and yeah, but I wanted to get in touch with my people or with his people or whatever, yeah, and then I wrote an email to Jutta, and so then I went to her and to Perleberg, and yeah, that was it. So and then I met Ruben this year when he was in Germany, and I went to I took part at Tabernacles, and after Tabernacles there was this calling, and I said, oh maybe, so now I have 2 months off, so, and so I asked Ruben if I can come to Australia, and right away he said, yes, for sure, you can come. Do you need anything? You need money or whatever? And I said, oh, wow, thank you, but a place to stay would be nice. And and he didn't ask anybody, and he just said, yes, come, and whatever you need, we help you to come here. And I felt, oh, wow.
Welcome to the family.
Thank you very much. I think that was it.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
Well,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Good.
Thank you for sharing. And by the way, your English is very good.
Thank you.
Yes. Not even that much of an accent.
It's wonderful that the Lord leads His people, and I've seen it happen again and again, that God will lead people to the Adventist Church, and then He will lead them to this message. That tells you that the church is still important as a foundation, as a channel to bring people into this message, and I'm very, very encouraged by that. And we're very thankful for YouTube, even though there's many things on YouTube that are not good. YouTube is still a blessing, and I've heard this story a number of times now, where people looking for answers can't find, and then suddenly our videos pop up, and then they start. I think I was mentioning to you about Azadeh and Tor in Norway. Same story, where they had been involved in the Adventist Church for about 1 year, weren't getting the answers, and then we popped up, and we got in contact, and similar story. So thank the Lord for these wonderful stories, and then He brings you here. So wonderful, and it's true. You know, we don't because I think you can borrow a little bit from the American Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident. They don't need to be. You don't have to be forced to subscribe to them. They are just true, and the freedom of them are obvious once you see them, once you understand them, and we hold them. We don't have to compel any person to believe them, and we are just so thankful, and we know that this will continue. So thank you for joining us. We pray that your time with us will be blessed. And yes, Ruben did contact us, say, do you have a place for Yvonne to stay? And I was like, well, let me pray about this. And we were just about moving house, and yes, of course. So we'll work something out. When there is a sincere seeker for truth, we want to be a blessing as much as we can. So in the remaining time that we have, we could look a little bit at cross-examined and cross-encountered. And the title, of course, in English it has a double meaning. Cross-examined means, what does it mean to cross-examine something?
Someone in a court case is cross-examined.
Examine what from different angles. Or
Examine from a different perspective, from a different line of understanding. And so with the cross, we are looking at the cross from a different line of thought process. And this is really I really felt I needed to put something down. I've been thinking about writing this book for at least 18 months in terms of our understanding of the cross and what is the cross. And so this is like the seed on this subject. There's so much more that could be written, but it goes back to probably since 2017, March 2017, when the presentation, the atonement and the demands of justice, when we did that presentation, everything changed. Everything changed. The whole world completely changed from that point. And I keep reiterating the point that there's clear evidence that the enemy was very upset about this because of the storm that came less than 24 hours later, and Brisbane was struck with 265,000 lightning strikes. We had power out, we had trees smashed and destroyed. It was really bad around our house, but as the storm came over us, we hardly felt it come past us. But trees are being snapped at this height, about this round, just snapped, like someone had gone through and just was very unhappy about what we had been shown in regard to the justice of God, and that God's justice, the whole concepts of counterfeit justice as opposed to God's justice, it is not something that, justice was justice. The idea that there were two types of justice had never really come clear for most of us to present. And suddenly the spirit of prophecy is just bringing this confirmation of that Satan has a justice system, and that it is and it's abhorrent to God. God hates this, and we cover this in the book Natural Justice and Atonement and Empowering the Third Angel's Message. And again, these booklets are seed booklets, and a seed is something where you're trying to see the whole tree. It's very hard to see the whole tree in a little seed, isn't it? But the whole tree is there. But we are bringing out. We're trying to bring together thought processes that will be able to expand later on. And so in those two booklets, we Lester is trying to ring me. Why are you trying to ring me, Lester? If you're watching, Lester, I'm doing something. So I don't have all of this up in my head at the moment, and it's just my head's so full with so many other things that are going on. So I can't give a synopsis of all the material in the book, but we can touch on some key points. And one of the issues was how do we present this idea? And for instance, we can look at this statement in Christ Triumphant, page 11.4, CTR 11. This idea where it says the condemning power of Satan would lead him to institute a theory of justice inconsistent with mercy. He claims to be officiating as the voice and the power of God, claims that his decisions are justice, are pure and without fault. Thus he takes his position on the judgment seat and declares that his counsels are infallible. Here his merciless justice comes in, a counterfeit of justice, abhorrent to God. Now, how do we present that from the Bible? It's in the spirit of prophecy, but on the principle of the divine pattern says if this is a channel and the Bible is the source, then this principle must exist in Scripture. It must be there, and we must be able to express this idea. And I thought about this for some time, about this counterfeit justice system. And then the story of Daniel and the lion's den came into focus when we were looking at this. And when we look at, as Paul says in Romans 15 and other places, all these things were written for our admonition, or 1 Corinthians 10, all these things were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. These things that were written aforetime are written for our learning. So these stories are written for our benefit. All the stories of the Old Testament have relevance for us, where we live, and for us today. And so the story in Daniel chapter 5, it just brought everything together. Or is it Daniel 6? We'll get there.
The lines.
Yeah, Daniel 6. And I obviously I'm covering this in this book in regard to we have a law. We have a law, and by this law this man ought to die. And it's interesting, of course, in the story of Darius. Darius is the king, and Daniel is placed to be the first of the three highest individuals under Darius. And we can read some of this. Verse 3, Daniel 6, verse 3. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes. He was preferred. And we see in here the story of Jesus, that he was preferred above the princes and the angels of heaven. He was preferred because there was in him a more excellent spirit. And why was there a more excellent spirit in him?
The Spirit of the Father.
Because the Spirit of the Father, all the fullness of the Godhead bodily dwells in him. He was the Son of God, and therefore he was preferred. So, obviously in these stories, not every detail is exactly the same, but the parallels are clearly there. And he thought to set him over the whole realm. And we see that this is what God did with his Son. He set his Son, he made him equal with himself, he set him over the whole realm to make him first. And the Spirit of prophecy tells us that who was next in honour to Christ?
Lucifer.
Lucifer, at that stage, so it later became Satan. Lucifer was next in honour to Christ. And we see in verse 4, then the presidents and the princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. Very interesting. But they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. So they're looking for something, and this is what we see with Christ, the Son of God, that Satan and the angels are looking for something. I remember that Utah had found a Spirit of Prophecy quote, which I find absolutely fascinating, and I don't have it with me, but when there was noise that this world was going to be created, the Spirit of Prophecy says that Lucifer came to the Father and says, please give me the permission to create this world. And it says that God refused him. That's an interesting piece of information, isn't it?
Jealousy.
He wanted to create this earth because he thought that he could do a better job than Christ. Not understanding that this world was going to be created in the image of the divine pattern. It had to be created by Christ. There was no, even if God wanted to give it to Lucifer to create, the purpose of this creation was to magnify the divine pattern of the Father and the Son, and therefore it was impossible for Lucifer to create this world. Even if God had desired it, it wouldn't have worked. It would have served another purpose completely. And
It's an example of the channel trying to be the source.
the channel trying to be the source.
And that spirit is just everywhere in the world.
And by thinking that he could do a better job than Christ, that, and of course when God says, no, my son. And then of course Lucifer is watching the Son go into the presence of the Father and watching their communion together, and the jealousy is fomenting. It is the frustration is coming out of him. And we see a bit of this in the story of Daniel. Verse 5, then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel. And what does the name Daniel mean in Hebrew? God is my judge. That's significant, isn't it? God is my judge. I want God to be my judge because God judges no one. I don't want to be my own judge. I'm a very, very harsh judge of myself and of others by nature. But if God is my judge, then I don't have to be afraid. Except we find it against him concerning what? The law of his God. And see, this is what Lucifer did. We hold there, we go to Psalms 94 verse 20. Psalm 94 verse 20. And it says, shall the throne of iniquity have fellowship with thee, which frameth mischief by law? By the law. This is a law, the law. Throne of iniquity. What is the throne of iniquity? The Satan. I will ascend into heaven. I will be like the Most High. I will be as God. And the throne of iniquity was made by doing mischief to the law. Now, the Bible tells us in Romans 7:14 that the law is what? The law is spiritual. So what does that mean? The law is spiritual. What does it mean?
It's to do with relationships.
It's to do with relationships, with relational beings, with spirit. The spirit of a person. The law is spiritual. Let me frame it as something that it is not. The law is not legal. The law is spiritual. What's the difference?
The letter killeth.
One's relational, the other one isn't.
One's relational, the other's not. In the words of another author, the law is design. Legal law is imposed. You do it, or else. God's law is not like this.
What about Psalms 119, 142? The testimonies and the Torah are truth.
Truth. Absolutely.
I am the way, the life, and the truth. It's all through the Bible.
Yes.
Truth.
Truth. Truth about God, truth about relationships. But the law of God, well, let me express it another way. Patriarchs and Prophets 305, Christ Object Lessons 405, I think. The law is a transcript of God's character.
Which is truth.
Which is truth. So the law is reflective of character.
But it's to preserve relationships.
To preserve relationships. And we talk all about that in Life Matters. About the law was designed to protect relationships that govern the relations between created beings and heavenly beings.
My Bible says you must have a truthful relationship.
Truthful. Yeah, absolutely. But do we understand the difference between legal and spiritual? This comes right to the heart of the mischief that Satan, and this is what this book is all about. And I can diagram it for you. This book diagrams or lays out for you what happens when. Is that going to work? There is God, and we just have man down here. And in this book we talk about the lie of inherent life source. We understand that God has life, as God has life in himself. So he's given to his Son to have life in himself. The lie that Satan introduced was that man has life in himself. The shift in understanding of life source changes the law of God from spiritual to legal. Do we understand how? Because when we understand that God has life, then the commandments are given to help us to stay connected to that life source. If God is the only one that has life, then the commandments are life to us. The fountain, the law of the wise is a fountain of life. It is written to show you how to stay connected to the relationship you have with God. But if you have life in yourself, then the law is something that is imposed upon you that you must perform in order to please God. And that makes it legal. because you now have the power to perform. Does that make sense? So it's the lie, you shall not surely die, that changes the law from spiritual to legal. From relationship to performance. Does that... And this is how Satan performed mischief, Eddie.
Is that why Ellen White makes that statement that in heaven the angels were not aware that there was a written law? Because it was a relation. They didn't need it.
They were not aware there was a law, and that's why Paul says the law is not made for a righteous man. It's not made for a righteous man because he's living it. It's spiritual. The law, as in the legal understanding of the law, is made for an unrighteous man, not for a righteous man.
Maybe could we say that text that says you won't come to me so that you can have life, rather than read it's the other way around. It's I've given you life now. If you want to keep it,
Yes.
follow my rules.
Yes.
Whereas the other one is you've got to come to me to get life.
Yes, you must come to me. You must be in a relationship with me. And again, when we believe that God is the only one that has life, and you read the commandments, you are reading, you will not have any other gods beside me. You will not take my name in vain. You will not kill. You will not steal. You will not commit adultery. You will not bear false witness. God's promising this to you because it's the truth sets you free. But when you introduce life here, and then you read the commandments, you will not have any other gods beside me, or else. That's the change in how it approaches. And this is how Satan began to attack the law of God. By shifting the life source, you have life in yourself, and we've documented this in Natural Justice and Atonement and Empowering the Third Angel's Message. That this shift was the mischief which caused the whole law of God to be seen in a different light. From spiritual to legal. And I think we did a presentation once. I think my friend Penny in South Africa, she'll know what this means. So we did a whole presentation on this. You'll remember, and we drew something out that way, and then we went down all of the Adventist doctrines on either side, one from a spiritual, one from a legal side, and the impact that this has on our understanding of the Adventist message. And it all goes back to this principle in this book. You know, where does your life source come from? Does it come from within yourself, or does it come from the God that you worship? And we do need to address this point. I've raised this a number of times, but it's very important that because as Seventh-day Adventists, we do not believe that we have an immortal soul, which means that technically we do not believe that you have life in yourself, do we? So how do we then fall for the idea, how do we get caught up in this idea of power, the power of life in yourself? Well, for Adventists it was done in a very cunning way, cunning on Satan's part. And that is through this doctrine. God the Son.
Not the Son.
God the Son, in Adventism, has life in himself, from nobody else. He didn't inherit it, he didn't receive it, he simply has it, he possesses it. And by beholding this, what happens to us? We become changed.
Because he proves he's God the Son by performance.
He proves
he
he's God the Son by what he does.
He can create.
He can create, he can do this. He can even come to earth and demonstrate to humanity what it is to be a perfect human. He can do all of these things. He can raise people to life. Yes, he shows us how to live because he is God the Son, but he has no inheritance. And by destroying his inheritance Adventism is introduced to inherent life source. Because the doctrine of the immortality of the soul and the Trinity are intimately linked together when you study the history. So, while Adventism does not have a belief in the immortality of the soul, it does so subtly through the doctrine of God the Son. Because they worship a Son that has life from himself. There's nothing within their concept of deity in which life is received from somebody else. You have it or you don't. And if you worship a God like that, without any mediator to give you, that shows you that you are receiving life, then you can't pattern yourself on that principle. Does that make sense? So the difference between God the Son and I know that some people in the church get frustrated when I get very intense about this point. That this is the difference between God the Son and the Son of God is life and death. Absolute. There's no, there's nothing on this. I would be dishonest to all of my friends if I said, it doesn't matter. It does matter. Because by beholding, you become changed. And the doctrine of God the Son strips of Christ his inheritance, and his inheritance is what gives to us the model of how we should live and how we should approach the Father. No man comes to the Father but by me, the Son of God, who inherited all things from his Father. So I'm just putting together a few pieces here in terms of this concept of justice and how Satan was able to zero in on the law of God by his lie, you shall not surely die, and that allowed him to introduce a counterfeit justice system because he turned the law into something legal rather than something spiritual. And that's when he introduced his idea. We see that in Desire of Ages 761. Desire of Ages 761. In the opening of the great controversy, this is paragraph 4, in the opening of the great controversy, Satan had declared that the law of God could not be obeyed. Why did he declare that?
He was disobeying it.
Because he was disobeying it, so he's saying it can't be obeyed.
Yeah, well, that's what a rebellious person does. They pull down the law.
Shows the nature of God is unfair. He's going to make a law that can't be obeyed.
Because he's using it as a legal document.
Doesn't it show you the arbitrary nature of what Satan is saying? He's saying, if you understand God correctly, the law of God is a transcript of his character. And it is conveyed by his Spirit to all of his creation. What do you mean the law of God cannot be obeyed?
He's turning it into a legal document.
He's turning it into
and
a legal.
therefore he's saying, if you make that a legal document, you're taking away from us our freedom.
Yes.
And that quickly he changed it.
Yeah. That's the mischief that he's working on the law of God, to make it legal. So, and obviously this has tremendous ramifications for our understanding of the judgment. In Adventism, the judgment scene, what sort of a scene is it? A courtroom.
Books are open.
The books are open, the judgment is set. It's a legal setting in Daniel 7. This is in Aramaic. You see, all this is being laid out through this big shift of life source, which makes the law legal. The law of God could not be obeyed. When the law is spiritual, meaning its character, its spirit, it's the person's personality.
Isn't spirit breath?
Breath.
Life.
Life.
Breath is life.
The law of the wise is a fountain of life. Proverbs 13:14 says that. What do you mean it cannot be obeyed? That's absurd. It's automatic. But Satan had introduced this counterfeit idea that justice was inconsistent with mercy. and that should the law be broken, it would be impossible for the sinner to be pardoned. This is all operating out of a legal framework, a legal understanding. Every sin must meet its punishment, urged Satan, and if God should remit the punishment of sin, he would not be a God of truth and justice. This is how Satan framed our human concepts of justice. He would not be, if he didn't punish sin. In a relational kingdom, when you violate the relationship, the punishment is automatic, isn't it? When you feel that distance, you feel distance growing between you and the person that you love, it causes pain. You have pain, it causes sorrow, tears, anguish. It's automatic. No one needs to inflict anything on you. It happens automatically. But Satan says, no, it must be punished. And this is what we're trying to, the beginnings of what we're trying to present in Cross-Examined and Cross-Encountered. That this false concept of justice is what has been framed for the world. And one of the opening passages that we looked at in that presentation, Atonement and the Demands of Justice, on where we looked at a statement that Pastor Walter Fite had stated in regard to the atonement, that God's justice demands death, but God's grace demands life. And we examined that. That was the starting point. And we asked the question, does God's justice demand death? This is what we were looking at. So let's come back to Daniel, in Daniel chapter 6. Again, how can God demand death when he's the only one that has life? The whole concept of demanding death or inflicting punishment in a spirit, it has no meaning whatsoever. It has no...
Well, Lazarus couldn't have died if Jesus had been.
Yeah, if Jesus had been there,
the life giver,
he couldn't die. Automatic. Just can't do it. So this really helps. So we come back to Daniel, verse 6. Then these presidents and princes, 6 verse 6, assembled together to the king and said unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes and the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. So how does that apply to Christ? Let's keep thinking about that one. So, what are they introducing here to the king? What are they submitting to the king? A legal document that if anybody should approach any other deity beside yourself, they shall be put to death. This is a...
Compulsive worship or compelling worship.
Compulsive worship of this deity.
Or death.
You'll die. So the death decree is introduced. So the principle of death is introduced and it's presented to the king, the highest person in the land. It's presented to him to flatter him and to strengthen his kingdom, isn't it? He's offering something to strengthen the kingdom of Darius and to make his kingdom more secure.
Sounds like Satan, doesn't it?
And this is where we read of Absalom. Oh, that I were made judge in the land. Then there would be justice. I will bring justice to the kingdom and I will honour my father and I will bring stability to the kingdom because I will introduce true justice. And what was Absalom's form of justice? What did he do to his brother, half-brother?
Kill them.
He killed him. That was his form of justice.
Retributive justice.
Yeah, retributive justice. To inflict punishment upon someone. And again, in a relational kingdom, when there is separation of relationship, the punishment is automatic. It's inherent. It has the power to kill people, to die of a broken heart when the relationships are destroyed and pulled apart. That's how much power it has. Isn't that what happened to Jesus? Isn't that what killed him? He died of a broken heart, separated from his Father.
The more you love someone, the more they separate, the worse it gets.
And it was our sin that caused that separation. So, now, O King, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Now, in the case of Darius, he wasn't really understanding what was going on, was he? Did God sign off on the death decree that Satan was bringing forward to his kingdom? Did he sign off on it? Didn't he?
He permitted it.
He permitted it.
He did not endorse it.
He didn't endorse it, but he permitted it. How did he permit it?
Gave his son to the world.
Spirit of Prophecy says he could have cast Satan to the earth like a pebble. He could have destroyed him and his followers. Well, that itself would have been confirming what Satan was saying, wasn't it?
Confirmation.
So he couldn't actually do that. How many of the angels were influenced by Satan? Remember, reflecting Christ. Now, Reflecting Christ, page 58 says, all of the angels were ready to exterminate this planet. Do we want to read that again? Yes. Reflecting Christ, RC 58.5. These are worth remembering. So, 58.4. Before Christ's first advent, the sin of refusing to conform to God's law had become widespread. Apparently Satan's power was growing, his warfare against heaven was becoming more and more determined. A crisis had been reached with an intense interest. God's movements were watched by the heavenly angels. Watched. And in another quote, it says that Satan had caused the angels to view God through the lens that he had created. And lens is not the word, but basically he saw everything as Satan had portrayed it to them. Because he was the first of the angels.
Power of suggestion's a nasty thing, eh? When you suggest something to somebody about somebody else, it's almost impossible to wipe that thought out of your head.
Yes.
Even if you don't believe it ininitially,
That's
that
it.
thought has been implanted like a seed, and it just stays there.
Now, Gavin, I don't want you to think about a blue elephant, all right?
Good on you.
So, right, got it. You see that? You see that nice blue elephant?
Yeah, I was
So-
just looking there when you said blue elephant. Blue shirt.
Yeah, nah. Would he send fire or flood? Would he come forth from his place to punish the inhabitants? This is what they're wondering. Of the world for their iniquity, would he send fire or flood to destroy them?
No.
This is the questions that they are asking.
Interesting, they're the only two options, and they're the two options that have been used, fire and flood.
Fire and flood.
Where was the other
And
one?
they're the two
Flood and fire,
Yeah.
so they knew that.
All heaven waited the bidding of their commander to pour out the vials of wrath upon a rebellious world. One word from him, one sign from him, and the world would have been destroyed. The world's unfallen would have said, Amen. Thou art righteous, O God, because thou hast exterminated rebellion. So all of the angels had shifted into this legal understanding of law. without even realising it.
Shows how convincing Satan is.
Yeah.
Deceptive sin.
Not even he himself fully understood where he was going with this.
Is that pre-flood?
Doesn't say. It possibly is.
And pre-Sodom and Gomorrah.
Well, didn't it say, but then he sent his son, so...
He said he would send his son. But God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him. So maybe it was just before the coming of Christ.
That's what I got from
Yeah.
that quote.
Yes. God might have sent his son to condemn, but he sent him to save. Hallelujah. That's the take-home point. And then it says this: Christ came as a redeemer. No words can describe the effect of this movement on the heavenly angels. They had their whole understanding reframed, because they then began to realise that they had been infiltrated in their thinking with a concept of justice that was not in harmony with the character of God.
So how did the guardian angels go protecting people before a certain point and then after a certain point? I wonder how their mindset changed.
Yeah. That's some interesting questions, aren't they? In terms of... we see in the story of David when he's protecting the flocks of Nabal, and when Nabal does not honour him and respect him, he was going, what? Is that how the angels were? I don't think they were quite in that. We don't want to bring them down to be like us, and how they would, how they would go about exterminating. I think they knew they only had to step back and let the evil one destroy them. They didn't have to actually do anything. So I don't think we want to put human characteristics on this.
No, I'm just wondering, when they understand God's character of care, how much more they must care.
Oh yeah.
Whereas before, when they're not sure how's God operate, well then how do they, obviously they're still doing their guardianship, but what's going on in their mind?
But we know that when Jesus died on the cross, that things were reconciled in heaven as well as on earth. Colossians 1:20 tells us to reconcile things, I say, in heaven and on earth. And we read in Desire of Ages 761 once again. Satan saw that his disguise, this is point 2, 761.2, Satan saw that his disguise was torn away, his administration was laid open before the unfallen angels and before the heavenly universe. He had revealed himself as a murderer by shedding the blood of the Son of God. He had uprooted himself from the sympathies of heavenly beings. Henceforth his work was restricted. How was it restricted? Because the heavenly beings had a change in their understanding and more clarity. They had walked by faith without fully understanding before, trusting and believing in their Heavenly Father, but now they could see the fruit of what Satan was teaching, and that was completely uprooted from their thinking. Whatever attitude he might assume, he could no longer await the angels as they came from the heavenly courts. He could only, this is the thing, he can only await and tempt those who have doubts and questions. If you have no doubts, no questions, Satan can do nothing to you. It's an interesting point for you. You can't linger and suggest things into your mind when you are confirmed in your understanding of what God has said. And before them accuse Christ's brethren of being clothed with the garments of blackness and defilement of sin. The last link of sympathy between Satan and the heavenly world was broken when Christ died upon the cross. But there is still a strong link of sympathy between humanity and Satan at the present time, isn't there? It then says, yet Satan was not then destroyed. The angels did not even then understand all that was involved in the great controversy. The angels didn't understand. What about us? If they didn't yet understand everything at this point, what about us? The principles at stake were to be more fully revealed, and for the sake of man, Satan's existence must be continued. man as well as angels must see the contrast between the Prince of Light and the Prince of Darkness. He must choose whom he will serve. And in order for Christ to continue to allow Satan to live, and when I say continue to allow him to live, the point we're making here is if Satan was completely left to his own, well, let's put it this way, Christ could stand in his presence and Satan's guilt would immediately crush and destroy him in an instant. Like that. That's what's going to happen to him in the end. His own guilt is going to destroy him. Christ gives him power, gives him strength, without fully manifesting his character towards him to protect Satan from destroying himself. Because if Christ's character was fully to reveal, and this is what will happen in the end, Christ's character, the Father's character, is fully revealed, then the guilt of what has been done, it crushes the soul. And so Christ is protecting Satan from the guilt of his own wickedness in order to allow him to live. And this speaks to an element in chapter 3 here, in all their affliction he was afflicted. An element of the cross which this comes to the very heart of our understanding of what is the cross. In all their affliction he was afflicted. And this is something that is really hard for us. We think of Christ being present today. In every human dwelling, Christ is present by his Spirit. Not in every human heart, but in every human dwelling. For if he was not in every human dwelling, as in abode or in their presence, a lot more people would be dying at the present time. And he listens to every conversation, he hears every word that is uttered, every abuse that is poured, all that. He's witnessing it all. I can't comprehend nor understand that. But Christ is also present wherever Satan is. He hears everything he says, everything he speaks, everything he thinks. Christ sees all of it. And how do you continue to give life to a being for 6,000 years who utterly hates, despises you, done everything to murder you, kill and destroy you, and you continue to give them life? That reframes your thought process, doesn't it? You think, well, why do I bother? Why do I bother? You know, I could just appear and it's not my problem. It's your problem, it's not my problem. You brought it on yourself. Don't look at me. You did it yourself. Let's just eliminate this problem. But it wouldn't fix the issues in the great controversy, would it? Because of this arbitrary understanding that both angels and humanity had come to understand, this mischief by the law that they had come to understand, Christ manifesting himself in his presence and seeing Satan crumple and fall to the ground and expire and die, with this wrong understanding of the law, the world, the universe would understand that Christ killed him using arbitrary force. And so we have to get it very clear that those 144,000 in the great multitude have a clear understanding that when Satan expires, when he dies, it is not a use of arbitrary force on part of God that is causing this death to take place. It is the guilt and the transgression of the sinner in the presence of God and his character that causes this death to take place. And God himself is not doing this. And this has to be clear so that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. Then we can end this great controversy and then we can move forward from this point.
Adrian, how do you harmonise that with the text as I will bring forth fire from the midst of thee and it shall devour thee? So the fire then is that guilt?
Yes, Ellen White talks about there's sins written like in molten lead, or it's the guilt, it's that fire, that burning, the realization of what I've done.
But isn't that, we understand that ourselves.
We understand that principle.
Because until we accept Christ and receive His grace, we are carrying that burning in our own
Yeah.
lives.
When you have that realization that you've done something terrible to somebody else, and I saw a headline this week of there was an ISIS man had found this Kurdish young girl, and he had sexually abused her for 5 years, many times a day, and they caught this guy, and then this lady she fronted him, which is just amazing, and told him, you've destroyed my life. You've absolutely destroyed my life by what you've done. And he's just standing there with his head down. What do you think he's feeling? Sadly, of course, in that situation, after her pouring out this stuff, she collapsed and fell on the ground and fainted, as you would. Because being in that presence, to relive all the things that this person and individual had done, without the ability to forgive, it crushed her as well, didn't it? Crushed her. How do you forgive a monster like that?
Only the Spirit of Christ. Can't do it, so.
You can't. Our natural inclination and desire is to destroy him for the filth and the abomination that he's practiced. This 14-year-old girl. And but every individual will have to face, and that individual will have to stand before Christ and realize that all the suffering and all the pain that he had caused Christ and what he did to that young lady for 5 years, he has to face it all. And it will utterly destroy him. His own sense of guilt. This is my daughter, what you did. And what do you have to say for yourself? The Father doesn't condemn him. Father doesn't speak any. What do you say? What do you say?
How does that work with someone who has no conscience?
In the presence of Christ, your conscience returns.
Did Cain have a conscience?
Yeah.
Not really, but he felt his guilt.
Because in the presence, and I've talked about this in terms of, we've talked all about the principle of vibration and frequency. When Christ comes into the presence of an evil person, he has a vibration and a frequency that is completely out of harmony with the wicked person. And when those two frequencies meet one another, there is incredible unrest and conflict within the wicked person. It is unbearably torture to be in the presence of Christ, simply because of the frequencies that are coming out of him. They can't stand those frequencies. They have trained their mind and their heart to ignore those frequencies, to shut down those frequencies, to cut off those frequencies, to save them from the pain and guilt. But when they come into the presence of Christ, those frequencies are coming there at such an intense rate of love and peace and love and mercy that it destroys them. But that's because they've trained every organ of their body to not be in harmony with those frequencies. So I'm just presenting it even from a frequency point of view, that all the organs of the body of such an individual, they've shut down the frequencies of love, mercy, grace, and so they have nothing to do with those things in order to cut off guilt. But as soon as they step into the presence of Christ, you can't stop those things because they're pouring out of him.
Pharaoh hardening his heart.
Yeah, Pharaoh hardening his heart. He shut down his heart from responding to those frequencies of love and grace and mercy. And so at the second coming, or at the third coming, when Pharaoh is standing there and Christ's, the Spirit, it goes, as it says in Great Controversy, that the great light, it falls upon the righteous and it goes out through the city. And for those of us in the city, those are frequencies that we have learnt to live within and joy in and rejoice in. It's a joy to us. But as they go out, as that light wave and those emotional, spiritual waves go out to the wicked, it tortures them. Because they've put themselves, Ellen White says, they've put themselves so out of harmony with God that to be in his presence is torture. So I'm just presenting it purely from a physiological point of view, from our understanding of all the work that Manfred Clynes did on sentics and emotion and waveform and all of this sort of stuff. You can't break the law. You can't.
I just listened to something on Intimacy again this week, talking about EMFs and microwave frequencies.
Mm.
She was talking about the fact that the different wavelengths
Yes.
resonate with affect different organs depending on the shape of the organ. Really interesting. You know, the length of the wave, the size of the object. I need to track that down and see. That was interesting stuff.
And we know from research where some people that have had heart transplants from other people, that some people have awoken. One person awoke with this intense anger when they awoke from having a heart transplant, because embedded into the heart organ was the vibration of anger, and so that suddenly comes into the person, and they're feeling this intense anger. Why? They hadn't felt it before, but it was written into the organ itself.
You couldn't do a heart transplant and be the same person if everything's written on your heart, could you? Had to say.
Scary.
It is.
It's interesting that all the experiences we have through the feasts, the times when we come together and we are blessed, those frequencies continue and grow.
This is preparing us for heaven.
Yes, and prepare us, and beholding we become changed.
Yeah.
And the more we experience those frequencies of joy and peace and submission and surrender, it changes us personally. But those are the opportunities where that can happen.
And the more you resist it, the worse it gets the other way.
Yes. The harder your heart
The
becomes.
harder you get, the more self-sufficient you become.
And for those of us now that have been participating in the feast for a number of years, we know these things are self-evident. The joy, the fellowship, you can't put it into words. You can't describe it, but you know it's true.
And taste and see.
You've tasted. We know these things are true. And it is confirmed by Scripture that, as Craig was saying this morning, the times of refreshing from the presence of the Lord in which he sends Jesus Christ. He's sending Jesus to us. And as we continue to behold him and watch him, as we come to the feast, he's going to steadily increase the ampage as we can handle it. Because
Called growing together.
yeah, growing together. Because in 2006, as I said to you, when I felt the embrace of my Father in 2006 through his Son, I thought I was going to die. I wasn't used to that frequency. He gave me as much as I could handle. I almost stopped breathing because I wasn't used to that kind of... And then he said, this message you must take to the world. So... that's why the feasts are so important, that we can, even these are my feasts, where you can participate more and receive more of that frequency, more of that joy, and as we participate in the new moon, you know, and you start to get used to the process. In the days before a festival, the intensity of the opposition ramps up, and we get tested, and we say and do things because it's bringing stuff out of you. It's bringing stuff out of you in order to give you grace to deal with those things. But if we're still in the legal system, if we're still in the legal model of dealing with these things, we come into the feast like, oh, I'm so hopeless, I'm so useless, there's no... But where sin abounds, grace does much more abound. So God's saying, let's have another look at another aspect of your character, because I'm about to pour out my Spirit, so that when you come into this feast, you can say, oh Lord, you know that I've got all these problems, but bless you, Father, I know you love me and you're merciful and you're gracious and you don't condemn me, and now I'm swimming in your love because it's your appointed time, and that's how we get healed. The leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations, the new moon and all those types of things, these things. And just to think, only a few short years ago, we knew nothing about this. Whew.
And it's hard to describe it.
It is. We've still got our little Ebenezer out there, don't we? where we testified, yes, this is the direction we're going. So we see in the story of Daniel that it was the third individual and below that instituted the death decree in the kingdom of Darius. Darius didn't introduce a death decree. Daniel didn't introduce a death decree, which represent father and son. It was the one below that instituted a death decree that if anybody approaches any other god except you, Darius, father, we're not going through some mediator, we're going directly to the father, then there's a death decree. And this shows you how Satan worked mischief by the Lord to introduce this death decree. And again, we see at the end of the story the death decree that these men had designed for Daniel. What happened?
Judged by
As
their
they
own
judged, so
judgment.
they were judged.
And Ellen White says in 12 manuscript release, she says, Satan will meet the punishment which he said God should exercise. As you judge, you will be judged. So that's just some of the snippets. Of course, the other big component in here is the chapter sacrifice and offering you did not desire. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire. The whole sacrificial system is a mirror to reflect back to us what we actually think God requires. And this is what we've been studying. You know, when you read, just look briefly, we're just in that mode. Genesis, I was reading this. God makes a promise to Abraham, I'm going to give you all this, and then what does Abraham do? He sacrifices. It's interesting, isn't it? And I'm trying to think. I can't find the. It's in the first couple of chapters there where it speaks to you. You'll read that God will promise him something, and then Abraham sacrifices because he's thinking. I want to show you a little bit more on this. It's quite interesting that in Genesis 15, when Ellen White actually says in Patriarchs and Prophets 137.1 that Abraham walked between those divided pieces and promised God perpetual obedience. And when you read A.T. Jones, what he says on this, he says only God walked between those sacrifices. Abraham didn't do it. Why would Jones say that? When Ellen White says that Abraham walked and promised perpetual obedience.
He wanted Abraham to stay in the new covenant.
He wanted Abraham to stay in the new covenant. Exactly, Craig. This is the Abrahamic covenant. It's the everlasting covenant. So Jones is in his effort to present this in the new covenant understanding. He understands enough to know that no, only God walks between the sacrifices. But no, Spirit of Prophecy says no, Abraham walked and he promised God perpetual obedience, which is completely old covenant.
Which is really important for us to see because these are men that are struggling.
So where do we see the new covenant? We see the new covenant in Genesis 15 verse 6 where it says, look now at the stars and see if you're able to number them, so shall thy seed be. And Abraham believed God and it was counted unto him for righteousness. That's the new covenant. But when he says, and this land, all this land I will give you, whereby shall I know that you will give me this land? That's old covenant. Because now he's doubting, now he's not trusting, now he's not believing, and that's where the whole sacrificial system and all those things coming out. So,
David, just talk about horror of great darkness there with isn't that always also said for Christ at some stage? I haven't, it popped in my head this week, but I haven't gone to check it up. Is that not used somewhere in Gethsemane or something? I don't know.
yes.
It is? There's a link there between, I don't know.
And I just want, because I've been thinking about this and I'm jumping ahead a little bit.
I didn't go and check that out.
When your child that you love dearly and is in an intimate relationship and you promise them something and they say, I don't know if I can trust you. Could that send you into a horror of a great darkness? The implication of that I can't trust you. The implication of that So what came upon Abraham was actually what Christ was feeling. You know what I'm saying? As in, it's just coming back to him. But Abraham is, I'm just thinking about
You're
this.
saying that Abraham's basically saying, God, I can't trust you, and he's feeling what Christ is feeling from that statement.
What Christ is feeling from the statement that you can't trust me, it's a horror of a great darkness. But the reason that Christ is feeling this horror is because your lack of faith is going to cause you and your descendants tremendous sorrow, and I'm going to be walking through this with them long after you're dead. Not that Christ is complaining, but he knows that I'm going to have to walk through this with them because of this unbelief that is manifested. And so Abraham experiences this horror of a great darkness. A lot more that we can look at there, but I think we'll leave it there. Thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you.
See, before I got up to speak, I was absolutely exhausted. Let me at the pulpit. I get my energy back. Let's close with prayer. Father, we just thank you for this beautiful Sabbath. We want to remain in this place with you, in the bosom of the Father, with you, and to enjoy your Spirit, your love, and the fellowship that we have together as these hours continue, that we may be prepared each Sabbath, each new moon, each Moedim, that we come more and more into harmony. And Father, for the following week, that the temptations to be frustrated, to be irritated, to speak words, Lord, help us to just move away from this and rest in your arms and to trust you, so that we learn not to allow these frequencies to be in our heart, that we don't become used to irritation, frustration, annoyance, doubt, unbelief, anger, jealousy, pride. All these vibrations in our organs will mean it will be impossible for us to stand before you unless we believe you fully forgive us and that we can freely access your presence through your Spirit. Please help each one of us as we continue to walk together in love. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.